Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Charleston, South Carolina. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented stories reach. The year was 1848 when Thomas Reed returned to his family's plantation just outside Charleston. The Reed estate stood tall among the sprawling oak trees draped with Spanish moss, a symbol of wealth built upon generations of cotton and rice production. According to county records from Dorchester County, Thomas had spent the previous 7 years studying law at Harvard University in Massachusetts, returning only when word reached him of his father's rapidly declining health. The Reed plantation, known locally as Moss Haven, sat approximately 15 miles northwest of Charleston proper, nestled along the winding Ashley River, where barges once transported cotton to the bustling Charleston harbor. The main house, a 3-story federal-style mansion with imposing white columns, had been constructed in 1791, according to property deeds preserved in the Charleston County Historical Society archives. When Thomas arrived home that unseasonably warm February day, the family physician, Dr. James Mitchell, was already preparing to leave. "Your father has perhaps 3 days," the doctor reportedly told Thomas, as recorded in Mitchell's medical journal, discovered during a 1766 courthouse renovation. "The consumption has spread to both lungs. There is nothing more I can do." Thomas climbed the grand staircase, each step creaking beneath his weight, despite the opulent surroundings. The hallway to his father's bedroom stretched longer than he remembered. The portraits of Reed ancestors seemed to track his movement, their painted eyes following his reluctant progress toward the master bedroom. According to household records maintained by the head housekeeper, Martha Wilson, Reginald Reed had been bedridden for approximately 6 weeks prior to his son's arrival. These records, discovered in a metal box during renovations to the servants' quarters in 1962, contained detailed accounts of Reginald's decline, including his increasing delirium and occasional violent outbursts. Clara Monroe had been assigned as Reginald's personal caretaker during his illness. According to plantation records, Clara was a 29-year-old woman who had been born on the Reed plantation and worked primarily in the main house since adolescence. Multiple accounts describe her as exceptionally literate, unusual for her status, having been taught to read by Reginald's late wife before her passing some 15 years earlier. Thomas reportedly found his father propped up with pillows, gaunt and yellowed, his once commanding presence diminished to a husk. Clara stood at his bedside, wiping his brow with a damp cloth. When Thomas entered, she stepped back, eyes downcast, as was expected. "Leave us," Reginald whispered to Clara, his voice barely audible according to Thomas's personal correspondence discovered in 1956. As Clara moved to exit, Reginald added, "But stay close. I'll need you shortly." What transpired in that room over the next hour would set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in one of Charleston's most disturbing chapters. According to Thomas's journal, discovered hidden behind a loose brick in the wine cellar during the estate's demolition in 1967, Reginald Reed made an unusual and troubling request of his only son. "Father barely recognized me at first," Thomas wrote in his journal. "His eyes were clouded, distant, but when clarity returned, he gripped my hand with surprising strength for a dying man." Reginald Reed spoke of regrets, of sins, of promises unfulfilled. According to Thomas's account, his father confessed to a relationship with Clara's mother some 30 years prior, one that had produced Clara herself, making her Thomas's half-sister, a fact apparently known only to Reginald and now Thomas. "You must make it right," Reginald allegedly told his son. "My soul will find no peace otherwise." The making right Reginald proposed was unprecedented and would have been considered scandalous by Charleston society of that era. According to Thomas's writings, his father demanded that upon his death, Thomas would free Clara and then marry her, legitimizing her as a Reed and ensuring she received her rightful portion of the family inheritance. "I laughed," Thomas wrote. "I thought it was the morphine doctor." Mitchell had prescribed speaking through him, but father's eyes were terrifyingly lucid. The senior Reed died 3 days later on February 20th, 1848, as Dr. Mitchell had predicted. His funeral was attended by Charleston's elite, as noted in the obituary published in the Charleston Mercury newspaper, preserved in the South Carolina Historical Society archives. No mention was made of his final request to his son. In the days following the funeral, Thomas threw himself into managing the plantation business. According to estate records, Moss Haven employed 47 enslaved individuals working the fields, with another 11 serving in the main house. The spring planting season was approaching, and decisions needed to be made. Clara continued her duties in the main house. According to Martha Wilson's household records, there was no immediate change in Clara's status following Reginald's death. Thomas made no mention of his father's request to anyone, if the lack of correspondence on the matter is to be believed. However, the atmosphere within the house reportedly changed. Servants noted in later testimonies that Thomas would stare at Clara during meals or when passing her in hallways. He would call her to his study to discuss household matters that would normally be handled by the housekeeper. Accounts suggest he began taking unusual interest in her activities. By April of that year, according to Thomas's journal, he had begun to consider his father's request seriously. "I find myself studying her features," he wrote, "looking for resemblances to father, to myself. Sometimes I see them, sometimes I don't. Is it possible father spoke the truth? Or was this merely the desperate plea of a dying man seeking absolution for his sins?" A letter discovered in 1959, written by Thomas to his former Harvard classmate William Everett, hinted at his dilemma. "I find myself contemplating an action that would destroy my standing in society, yet might be the only honorable course available to me. Can duty to one's father extend beyond rational boundaries, beyond societal norms? I find myself unable to eat or sleep properly as I wrestle with this matter." According to plantation financial records, on June 7th, 1848, Thomas withdrew a significant sum from the plantation accounts and visited a lawyer in Charleston named Frederick Holbrook. While the exact nature of their business was not recorded, subsequent events suggest Thomas was exploring the legal process of manumission, the act of freeing an enslaved person. On June 23rd, according to documents filed with the Charleston County Clerk, Thomas Reed officially freed Clara Monroe. The document, preserved in county archives, cited faithful service to the Reed family as the reason for her manumission. No mention was made of any familial connection. This act alone caused ripples in Charleston society. According to letters between prominent Charleston families preserved in various historical collections, Thomas's decision was met with confusion and some concern. Freeing enslaved individuals, while legal, was uncommon in South Carolina during this period and often viewed with suspicion by slave-holding families who feared it might encourage unrest. What happened next would transform concern into outright scandal. According to church records from St. Michael's Episcopal Church, on July 9, 1848, Thomas Reed married a free woman of color named Clara Monroe in a private ceremony performed by Reverend Jonathan Wright. The record notes that only 2 witnesses were present: Martha Wilson, the Reed housekeeper, and Samuel Cooper, Thomas's valet. Reverend Wright's personal diary, discovered during a church archive reorganization in 1963, reveals his misgivings about the ceremony. "I perform my duties as requested," he wrote, though with grave reservations about the wisdom of such a union. Mr. Reed was most insistent, claiming it was to fulfill a deathbed promise to his father. "I fear the consequences that may befall them both." Those consequences were swift. According to multiple sources, including newspaper accounts and personal correspondence between Charleston families, Thomas and Clara were immediately ostracized from society. The Charleston Mercury, in a thinly veiled reference dated July 15th, mentioned that a certain prominent family has brought shame upon itself through an unsuitable alliance that violates not only social custom, but natural law. Thomas's business associates severed ties with him. Neighboring plantation owners refused to coordinate seasonal activities as had been traditional. Invitations to social events ceased entirely. According to Martha Wilson's accounts, visitors to Moss Haven dwindled to almost none by August. More ominously, according to sheriff's reports filed in Dorchester County, Thomas began receiving threatening messages. Anonymous notes were left at the plantation gates. On one occasion in late July, a small fire was set in one of the outlying storage buildings, though it was quickly contained. Throughout this period, Thomas's journal entries reveal a man increasingly isolated and paranoid. "I have done what Father asked," he wrote in early August, "but I wonder if his true aim was my destruction rather than Clara's elevation. I see now how completely I have been cut off from the world I knew." Clara's perspective during this time is largely absent from historical records. As was typical for the era, her thoughts and feelings were seldom documented. However, according to Martha Wilson's accounts, Clara seemed withdrawn and fearful following the marriage, rarely leaving the main house and speaking little even to the household staff who had previously been her colleagues. By September, Thomas had withdrawn almost completely from public life. According to business records, he appointed an overseer named Edward Hayes to manage the day-to-day plantation operations, an unusual step for a plantation owner to take unless traveling. But Thomas went nowhere. According to his journal, he spent most days in his study, drinking heavily and rereading his father's correspondence, searching for some explanation beyond what he had been told. On October 3rd, according to a report filed by the county sheriff, a more serious incident occurred. A group of men approached the plantation after midnight. The overseer, Hayes, and several others confronted them at the property boundary. Words were exchanged, followed by gunshots. No one was injured, but the message was clear. The community would not accept this violation of social norms. Thomas's journal entry from the following day reads, "They will not stop until we are gone or dead." Perhaps Father knew this would be the outcome. Perhaps this was his true intent all along, to destroy what he built through me. On October 21st, Thomas made a significant decision. According to travel records maintained by the Charleston Harbor Master, Thomas booked passage for 2 people on a merchant vessel bound for Boston, scheduled to depart on November 5th. Preparations began at Moss Haven for an extended absence. It was during these preparations that something unexpected was discovered. According to Martha Wilson's accounts, while gathering documents Thomas might need for the journey, Clara found a hidden compartment in Reginald Reed's desk containing a packet of letters dated from 1815 through 1820. The letters were correspondence between Reginald and a woman named Elizabeth Monroe, Clara's mother. The content of these letters, which were partially preserved in the Charleston Historical Society archives after being discovered during the 1962 renovations, revealed a relationship far different than what Reginald had described to Thomas on his deathbed. Elizabeth Monroe, according to these letters, had indeed been involved with Reginald Reed, but not in the way he had claimed. She had not been a willing participant, but had been repeatedly victimized by him. More disturbingly, the letters contained veiled references to a promise Reginald had made to Elizabeth, that if she bore him a daughter, he would ensure that daughter would eventually become mistress of Moss Haven through marriage to his legitimate son. According to Martha Wilson's account, when Clara brought these letters to Thomas, the master's face went white as cotton. He locked himself in his study for 2 days, refusing food and speaking to no one, not even Mrs. Reed. When Thomas emerged, according to journal entries dated late October, he had reached a disturbing conclusion. Father's deathbed wish was no act of contrition, he wrote. It was the fulfillment of a twisted promise made decades ago. He has made me an unwitting participant in a scheme conceived before my birth. Clara and I are both his pawns. The planned departure for Boston was cancelled. Instead, according to Thomas's journal, he and Clara began investigating the full extent of Reginald's machinations. They discovered additional correspondence suggesting that Reginald had manipulated various aspects of both their lives for years, guiding them toward the eventual fulfillment of his promise to Elizabeth. As October turned to November, the atmosphere at Moss Haven grew increasingly tense. According to Martha Wilson, Thomas and Clara rarely spoke to each other, though they often occupied the same rooms. They circled each other like wary animals, she later recalled in testimony to the sheriff, each the reminder to the other of how thoroughly they had been used by the old master. On the evening of November 12th, according to sheriff's reports and witness testimonies, Thomas hosted what would be his final dinner at Moss Haven. Present were Clara, Martha Wilson, the overseer Hayes, and Reverend Wright from St. Michael's. According to all accounts, the meal was largely silent until dessert was served. At that point, according to Reverend Wright's subsequent statement, Thomas stood and made a toast. "To my father," he reportedly said, "who orchestrated all of this from beyond the grave. May he rot in hell for what he's done to us all." After the toast, Thomas announced his intention to sign over the Reed plantation to Clara and depart for Europe on the next available ship. According to Hayes's testimony, this announcement was met with shock by all present. What happened next remains subject to conflicting accounts. According to Martha Wilson, after the guests departed, Thomas and Clara retired to the study, where they could be heard arguing. According to her testimony, shortly before midnight, she heard a single gunshot, followed approximately 30 seconds later by a second shot. Upon entering the study, Martha discovered both Thomas and Clara dead. Thomas was seated at his father's desk, a pistol in his hand and a wound to his temple. Clara lay on the floor nearby, similarly wounded. A single piece of paper lay on the desk between them, containing only the words, "His final wish is undone." The official investigation, conducted by the Dorchester County Sheriff's Department, concluded that Thomas had shot Clara before turning the gun on himself. However, certain inconsistencies in the physical evidence, noted by the examining physician but subsequently dismissed, have led some historians to question this finding. News of the deaths spread quickly through Charleston society. According to newspaper reports, the dominant reaction was not shock, but rather a grim satisfaction that a social aberration had been corrected, though not in a manner anyone would have wished. Moss Haven Plantation was eventually sold to satisfy Thomas's creditors, as he had apparently been liquidating assets in preparation for departure. No direct descendants remained to inherit the property. The main house remained standing until 1967, when it was demolished to make way for a highway expansion project. It was during this demolition that workers discovered a sealed room in the basement containing Reginald Reed's personal diaries and correspondence, which shed additional light on the tragedy. These documents, now preserved in the South Carolina Historical Society, reveal a man who viewed people as pieces on a chessboard, to be moved and sacrificed according to his grand design. Most disturbing was an entry dated just 1 week before his death, in which Reginald wrote, "All is in place. Thomas will return. The seed has been planted. My word to Elizabeth will be kept, though neither she nor her daughter will ever know the full scope of my design. The Reed and Monroe bloodlines will be united, and in doing so, both will be extinguished. This is my true legacy." The graves of Thomas and Clara Reed can still be found in a small, unmaintained cemetery on what was once the edge of the Reed plantation property. According to local accounts, for decades after their deaths, flowers would occasionally appear on Clara's grave, though no one ever claimed responsibility for placing them there. In 1969, a graduate student researching the history of the Reed plantation claimed to have encountered a woman in period dress near the cemetery. According to his account, when he approached her, she pointed to the graves and said, "They never had a chance. He planned it all." When the student turned to look at the gravestones, the woman reportedly vanished. Historians continue to debate the full truth of what happened at Moss Haven in 1848. Was Reginald Reed simply a dying man seeking to right a wrong? Or was he, as his private writings suggest, orchestrating a complex revenge against his own bloodline for reasons that may never be fully understood? What remains clear is that Thomas and Clara were victims of forces set in motion long before either had any power to resist them. The whispers of their story still echo among the Spanish moss and oak trees that once surrounded Moss Haven, a reminder of how the sins of one generation can become the tragedy of the next. To this day, local residents report strange sounds in the area where the main house once stood. Sometimes whispered arguments, sometimes weeping, sometimes a single gunshot followed by another. According to these accounts, the sounds are always loudest in November, particularly around the 12th of the month. Some say it is merely the wind in the trees and the imagination of those who know the story. Others believe it is Thomas and Clara, caught in an eternal moment of realization that they were never free agents in their own lives, but merely characters in a tragedy written by a man who viewed his own family as nothing more than tools for his inscrutable purpose. The land where Moss Haven once stood remains undeveloped beyond the highway that necessitated the demolition of the main house. According to county records, multiple attempts to build on the remaining acreage have been abandoned after accidents, financial setbacks, or unexplained phenomena drove away workers and investors. In 1968, during the last serious attempt to develop the property, construction workers reported finding a hidden room beneath what would have been the main study. Inside was nothing but a single chair facing a wall on which was written a message that, according to their accounts, appeared to be scrawled in dried blood. "His wish will never be fulfilled." The Reed-Monroe tragedy serves as a stark reminder of how the past reaches into the present, how secrets fester across generations, and how the silent spaces between what is said and what is true can become chasms wide enough to swallow entire families. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the story is not the tragic end of Thomas and Clara, but rather the cold calculation of Reginald Reed, a man who spent decades orchestrating the destruction of his own bloodline for reasons he took to his grave. As his final journal entry, dated the day before his death, chillingly states, "They will never understand the necessity of what I've done. Some stains cannot be washed away. They must be burned out completely." What stain Reginald believed existed in the Reed bloodline remains unknown. Whatever sins he sought to expiate through the manipulation and destruction of his son and unacknowledged daughter died with him, leaving behind only the tragic consequences of his machinations. Today, only fragments remain of the once proud Reed legacy, scattered documents in historical archives, crumbling gravestones in an overgrown cemetery, and the persistent rumors of unnatural sounds among the oak trees where Moss Haven once stood. The story serves as a somber footnote in Charleston's long and often troubled history, a reminder that beneath the veneer of southern gentility often lay currents of darkness that could, when channeled by a determined hand, destroy everything they touched. As for Thomas and Clara, perhaps the most fitting epitaph comes not from the simple markers on their graves, but from a note reportedly found clutched in Clara's hand after her death. According to the sheriff's report, since lost but quoted in a newspaper account, it read simply, "Neither of us ever had a choice. May we find in death the freedom denied us in life." The investigation into the deaths at Moss Haven was notably brief by modern standards. According to county records, Sheriff William Lawton spent less than 3 days examining the scene and interviewing witnesses before officially concluding that Thomas had murdered Clara before taking his own life. This hasty conclusion, while convenient for Charleston society eager to move past the scandal, left many questions unanswered. Dr. Harold Jenkins, who examined the bodies, noted several inconsistencies in his medical report that were subsequently overlooked. According to documents discovered during a courthouse archive reorganization in 1965, Jenkins observed that the angle of Clara's wound was unusual for a murder, while the position of Thomas's body, relative to the desk, did not align with his supposed final actions. Most tellingly, Jenkins noted traces of what appeared to be ink on Clara's right hand, suggesting she had been writing shortly before her death, possibly the note found in her left hand. This observation contradicts the official narrative that Thomas wrote the note and placed it on the desk before shooting Clara and himself. Martha Wilson, who remained at Moss Haven until its sale, provided additional details in a journal discovered among her personal effects after her death in 1872. According to her private writings, in the weeks leading up to that final night, she had observed Clara making extensive notes after reading Reginald's hidden correspondence. Mrs. Reed spent hours each night writing in a bound volume she kept locked in her wardrobe, Wilson wrote. When I inquired about it, she said only that she was documenting the true history of Moss Haven and that someday people would understand what really happened here. This journal was never found during the investigation. According to Wilson's account, when she mentioned its existence to Sheriff Lawton, he dismissed it as irrelevant. What writings of hers would matter now, he reportedly said. The bodies of Thomas and Clara were initially denied burial in the Reed family cemetery by local church authorities. According to church records, Reverend Wright argued passionately against this decision but was overruled by church elders. It was only after significant financial contribution to St. Michael's by an anonymous donor, later revealed through banking records to be Martha Wilson herself, that the two were permitted to be buried on the edge of what had been Reed land, though not within the formal family plot. The graves themselves tell a story that contradicts the official narrative. According to detailed descriptions in historical society records, while Thomas's headstone bears only his name and dates, Clara's includes the Reed family crest, an addition that would have required special commission and considerable expense. Records from a Charleston stonemason, discovered in 1962, indicate this addition was ordered and paid for by Martha Wilson 6 months after the burials. The aftermath of the tragedy rippled through Charleston society for years. According to correspondence between prominent families, the Reed-Monroe incident became a cautionary tale, whispered about but rarely discussed openly. Several families with plantations neighboring the former Moss Haven property reportedly forbade their children from venturing near the abandoned estate, citing concerns about unhealthy influences. The overseer Hayes, who continued managing the property until its sale in 1849, reported numerous incidents of unexplained phenomena. According to his letters to the property agent handling the sale, Workers refused to enter the main house after dark, claiming to hear footsteps in empty rooms and seeing shadows move against walls when no one was present. Most disturbing was Hayes's account of finding the study, where the deaths occurred, rearranged overnight despite being kept locked. On 3 separate occasions, he wrote in February 1849, I secured the study door myself at dusk, only to find the furniture moved by morning. The desk, in particular, is repeatedly turned to face the eastern window rather than the door, though no one acknowledges moving it. The eventual buyer of the property, a merchant from New Orleans named George Sullivan, never actually occupied the house. According to county records, Sullivan purchased Moss Haven at a significant discount with the intention of renovating and reselling it. However, after a 2-week stay during which he reportedly experienced disturbing dreams and an overwhelming sense of being watched, Sullivan abandoned these plans. The property changed hands 6 more times between 1850 and 1900, with no owner remaining in residence for more than 8 months. According to local newspaper accounts and personal correspondence preserved in various historical collections, each owner reported similar experiences: unusual sounds, particularly at night, objects moving without explanation, and a pervasive sense of being unwelcome. By 1910, the once grand Moss Haven had fallen into serious disrepair. According to county assessment records, the outbuildings had collapsed, the fields had returned to forest, and the main house, while still structurally sound, had become a shell of its former self. Local children reportedly dared each other to spend nights on the property, though few completed the challenge. It was during this period that the legend of Clara's Light first appeared in local folklore. According to accounts collected by folklorist Margaret Simmons in 1935, residents near the former plantation reported seeing a light moving among the trees at night, particularly during November. The light, described as pale blue and flickering like a candle, would reportedly move from the site of the main house to the cemetery and back again. In 1922, a history professor from the College of Charleston named James Thornwell attempted the first formal historical investigation of the Reed Monroe incident. According to his notes, preserved in the college archives, Thornwell interviewed elderly residents who remembered the scandal and collected what documentation remained. His most significant discovery came through the descendants of Martha Wilson, who provided him with her personal diaries. These writings contained a shocking claim that had never been part of the official record, that Martha had entered the study immediately after hearing the first gunshot, not after both shots, as she had testified to authorities. According to this private account, Martha found Clara standing over Thomas's body, the pistol in her hand. Her eyes were clear and calm, Martha wrote. She said only, "He couldn't live with what we discovered. I cannot live without setting it right." Before I could speak or move, she placed a paper in my hand, raised the pistol to her own temple, and fired. The paper, according to Martha's diary, contained instructions for ensuring both she and Thomas would be buried together, along with a request that Martha preserve certain documents Martha had hidden beneath a floorboard in her quarters. Martha claimed in her diary that she removed these documents before the sheriff arrived and kept them hidden throughout her life. Thornwell's investigation ended abruptly when he suffered a stroke in 1923. His notes indicate he had been attempting to locate these hidden documents, believing they might contain Clara's account of the events leading to the tragedy. His final entry, dated just 3 days before his stroke, reads, "I dreamed of her again last night. She stands at the window of that study, beckoning, always beckoning. What is it she wants me to see?" In 1941, during preparations for potential coastal defenses in the early days of American involvement in World War II, a military survey team mapped the former Moss Haven property. Their report, declassified in 1967, contains an unusual footnote regarding anomalous magnetic readings around the site of the former main house, and particularly strong disturbances near the study's location. The team's commander, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, coincidentally sharing a surname with the former overseer, though no relation has been established, noted in his personal correspondence that the survey team experienced equipment failures and unexplained illness while working on the property. 4 men reported the same dream, he wrote to his superior, of a woman in period dress showing them a book or journal and pointing eastward toward the river. 2 requested transfers rather than return to the site. The property remained largely untouched until 1967, when the South Carolina Highway Department approved plans for an expansion that would run directly through the former plantation grounds. During preliminary work, as mentioned earlier, workers discovered the hidden room containing Reginald Reed's personal papers, as well as Thomas's journal behind the loose brick in the wine cellar. What was not reported publicly at the time, but later emerged through Freedom of Information Act requests in 1998, was the discovery of a small leather-bound volume sealed in a metal box beneath what had been Clara's quarters. This journal, now preserved in the South Carolina Historical Society archives, provides the only known account of these events from Clara's perspective. The journal, which begins shortly after her marriage to Thomas and ends just days before the final tragedy, reveals a woman of remarkable intelligence and perception, gradually uncovering the full extent of Reginald Reed's manipulation. According to her writings, Clara had suspected some connection to the Reed family from childhood, noting resemblances that others commented on but quickly silenced. Most revealing is her entry from November 10th, just 2 days before the deaths. "I have assembled the complete picture at last. Ours correspondence with Mother reveals not just acknowledgement of paternity, but a plan conceived before T was even born. The combined documents show how methodically he manipulated both our lives, arranging my education, ensuring I would be assigned to his care during his illness, and positioning T to fulfill his macabre promise. But there is something deeper still. The land surveys hidden in his desk suggest the true motive, and it is more terrible than either T or I imagined. This reference to land surveys has led some historians to speculate about additional motivations behind Reginald's actions. According to geological surveys conducted in 1954, the Moss Haven property sits atop what would have been a valuable mineral deposit, knowledge that would have been available to someone with Reginald's resources in the 1840s. Some scholars have theorized that Reginald's elaborate scheme may have been designed not merely out of twisted personal motives, but to ensure the property would ultimately be abandoned, preserving something beneath it from discovery or exploitation. This theory gained support when preliminary excavations for the highway project uncovered unusual stone formations beneath the main house foundation, formations that appeared to have been deliberately preserved when the house was built. The highway project itself suffered numerous setbacks. According to Department of Transportation records, work was halted no fewer than 7 times due to equipment failures, unexplained accidents, and worker complaints. 3 different contractors withdrew from the project, with the final one citing insurmountable practical difficulties and workforce concerns in their formal letter of withdrawal. When the highway was eventually completed in 1969, its route had been modified to preserve a small section of the original property, specifically the area where the study had stood and the small cemetery where Thomas and Clara remain buried. This modification was officially attributed to soil stability concerns, though internal memos suggest pressure from historical preservation groups played a significant role. In the decades since, the Reed Monroe tragedy has become a staple of Charleston ghost tours and local lore. Tour guides point out the small fenced cemetery visible from the highway and recount simplified versions of the story, usually emphasizing the forbidden romance angle while omitting the more disturbing elements of Reginald's manipulation. What few of these tours mention is the continued pattern of unusual occurrences associated with the site. According to South Carolina Highway Patrol records, the stretch of highway passing the former Moss Haven property has an accident rate 3 times higher than statistically expected, with a particular concentration of incidents occurring in November. More intriguing are the reports collected by paranormal researchers who have investigated the site over the years. According to these accounts, electronic equipment frequently malfunctions in the vicinity of the cemetery. Digital recordings contain unexplained voices. Photographs show anomalies that technical experts have been unable to explain. In 1986, a team from a university parapsychology department conducted the most comprehensive investigation to date. Their findings, published in an obscure academic journal, described consistent electromagnetic anomalies around the cemetery and former study site. More compelling were the reported experiences of the research team members themselves. All 6 researchers reported vivid dreams involving the same woman, the paper noted, described consistently as wearing mid-19th century clothing and attempting to show them documents or lead them to a specific location. 3 researchers independently sketched the woman's appearance with remarkable similarities, though none had been shown historical images of Clara Monroe Reed. The most recent chapter in this disturbing history occurred in 2011, when highway expansion plans once again threatened the small plot containing the cemetery. According to public records, the initial proposal would have required relocating the graves to accommodate additional lanes. The project engineer, Catherine Miller, personally visited the site before finalizing plans. According to her subsequent report, while taking measurements near the graves, she experienced a sudden drop in temperature and the overwhelming sensation of being watched with intense disapproval. When she returned to her vehicle, she discovered her digital files had been corrupted, while her paper notes contained a phrase she did not recall writing. They must remain together. Some promises must be kept. Miller subsequently modified the expansion plans to preserve the cemetery, despite the additional engineering challenges and costs this created. When questioned by supervisors, she reportedly said only, "Some places should be left undisturbed. This is one of them." Today, thousands of commuters pass daily within yards of where Thomas and Clara Reed lived and died, most unaware of the dark history beneath the pavement and surrounding trees. The small cemetery remains, though the headstones have weathered to near illegibility. Occasionally flowers appear on the graves, left by history enthusiasts or perhaps by those who feel drawn to the site for reasons they cannot articulate. Local residents still report unusual phenomena in the area, lights where no lights should be, sudden cold spots even in summer, and most commonly, the sound of a woman's voice reciting what sounds like passages from a book, though the words are never quite clear enough to transcribe. Perhaps most disturbing are the reports from highway workers assigned to maintain this stretch of road. According to informal accounts, they often experience the sensation of being followed while working near the site. Several have reported hearing what sounds like pages turning or a pen scratching on paper, though no source can be located. One worker, who requested anonymity when interviewed by a local newspaper in 2015, described finding fresh ink writing on his equipment after setting it down briefly near the cemetery, writing that disappeared when he tried to photograph it. The message, he claimed, read simply, "The truth remains buried, but not for much longer." What really happened at Moss Haven Plantation in those autumn days of 1848? Was it simply a tragedy born of forbidden love and societal prejudice, as the simplified ghost tour version suggests? Was it the culmination of Reginald Reed's decades-long manipulation, as the historical evidence indicates? Or is there some deeper secret still buried beneath the red clay soil of the former plantation, a secret Clara discovered and that may have led to her death? Perhaps we will never know the complete truth. The principals are long dead. Much of the documentary evidence has been lost to time or deliberately destroyed. What remains are fragments, journal entries, official reports, personal correspondence that offer glimpses of a story more complex and disturbing than the official narrative ever acknowledged. What seems clear is that Thomas and Clara Reed were caught in a web not of their own making, manipulated by forces they only partially understood, and ultimately destroyed by secrets that had festered across generations. Their tragedy serves as a somber reminder that the past is never truly buried. It merely waits beneath the surface, its influence reaching across decades and even centuries to shape the present in ways we may never fully comprehend. As for Moss Haven itself, nothing remains of the once grand plantation save for the small cemetery and the undeveloped woodland surrounding it. Yet something of its history persists, in the unexplained accidents on the highway, in the dreams of those who visit the site, and in the persistent rumors of a woman still searching for someone to uncover the final truth of what happened there in the autumn of 1848. Local historian Margaret Jenkins, who has studied the Reed Monroe case for over 20 years, perhaps said it best: "Some tragedies never truly end. They merely pause, waiting for someone to notice what has been overlooked, to hear what has been silenced." The story of Thomas and Clara isn't finished. It's merely waiting for the right person to turn the page. For now, their graves remain side by side, worn by time and weather but undisturbed, a silent testament to lives intertwined by blood, manipulation, and perhaps something like love. And on quiet nights, particularly in November, those who walk near the former grounds of Moss Haven Plantation might hear what sounds like a pen scratching on paper, as if someone is still writing, still attempting to record the true story of what happened there, a story that after nearly 2 centuries remains unfinished.